It started with irritation, not inspiration. The kind of irritation that builds quietly when days blur together and effort never seems to translate into progress. Every morning looked productive on the surface, yet nothing meaningful moved forward. The internet kept shouting about breakthroughs, hacks, and overnight wins, but reality felt stubbornly unchanged. That tension between noise and lived experience created an uncomfortable question. What if the problem wasn't the effort, but direction? Most people assume results come from dramatic changes. New routines, new tools, new promises. But the irritation came from noticing something subtler. Certain people weren't louder, smarter, or luckier. They weren't posting screenshots or selling courses. Yet somehow, their days added up differently. Small actions repeated, quietly compounding into outcomes that looked impossible from the outside. No announcements, no hype, just consistency hidden in plain sight. That realization didn't arrive as clarity. It arrived as discomfort. If something simple was working, then all the complexity being sold everywhere suddenly felt suspicious. The mind resists that idea. Simple feels insulting in a world addicted to sophistication, but irritation has a way of cutting through denial. It forces attention. It forces observation instead of imagination. The pattern appeared in moments most people ignore. Short time windows, boring tasks, uncelebrated habits, the kind that don't impress anyone, including yourself. That's why they're invisible. Everyone wants leverage without repetition, outcomes without boredom. Yet the irritation kept returning to the same thought. Maybe the reason this works is because it doesn't feel exciting enough to copy. Ordinary routines promise safety. Extraordinary claims promise escape. This pattern promised neither. It sat uncomfortably between them, too small to brag about. Too slow to feel thrilling, but undeniably real. That contrast mattered. Because realism doesn't seduce, it convinces over time. And urgency doesn't always come from opportunity. Sometimes it comes from realizing how much time is being spent chasing the wrong signals. The decision to test this wasn't bold. It was quiet, almost reluctant. 7 days felt harmless. Short enough to avoid commitment, long enough to reveal friction. No expectations of transformation. No dramatic vision of success. Just a controlled interruption of routine to see whether irritation was pointing toward something true. What made this moment different wasn't hope, it was skepticism. Skepticism sharpened by repetition, disappointment, and experience. If something failed again, it would simply confirm what already felt true. But if it worked, even slightly, it would expose a deeper problem with how progress had been defined all along. That's what made the pattern dangerous. Not because it promised more, but because it questioned assumptions. It suggested that the gap between where people are and where they want to be might not require intensity, only alignment. And alignment, once noticed, becomes impossible to ignore. By the end of that moment, irritation had shifted into curiosity. Not the loud, impatient kind, but a focused curiosity, grounded in restraint. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that watches quietly while others scroll past. And that curiosity was enough to begin.
Skepticism didn't disappear after the decision was made. If anything, it intensified. Years of overpromised systems, recycled advice, and confident failures had trained a natural resistance. Every simple method online eventually revealed itself as either incomplete, exaggerated, or dependent on circumstances no one admitted up front. That history mattered. It shaped expectations and lowered them deliberately. Blind belief had already proven expensive. Most people watching similar content carry the same quiet fatigue. They've clicked before. They've tried before. They know the language of manipulation, urgency, exclusivity, testimonials without context. That's why trust doesn't come from excitement anymore. It comes from restraint, from acknowledging that most things don't work the way they're sold, and from admitting that failure is usually more common than success. This is where most creators lose intelligent viewers. They assume skepticism is negativity. It isn't. It's pattern recognition. Skeptical people aren't close-minded. They're protective. They've learned that enthusiasm without structure is a liability. So instead of fighting that instinct, this experiment leaned into it. Doubt wasn't treated as an obstacle. It was treated as a filter. The reason most people miss this trick isn't lack of intelligence, it's overexposure. The modern environment rewards extremes, big numbers, fast results, clear villains and heroes. Anything quiet, incremental, or unremarkable gets filtered out as irrelevant. Attention naturally drifts toward what feels urgent, not what works slowly. That bias shapes decisions long before logic gets involved. Past failures also distort perception. When something doesn't work, the brain doesn't just reject the method, it often rejects the category entirely. Online income doesn't work, side projects fail, nothing simple is real. These conclusions feel rational, but they're emotionally charged shortcuts. They protect against disappointment, but they also block experimentation, especially experiments that don't announce themselves loudly. What made this different wasn't belief in success, it was belief in process. The willingness to test something without storytelling around it. No screenshots imagined, no future narrative rehearsed, just a temporary suspension of judgment. That's rare. Most people need certainty before action, but certainty usually arrives after action, not before. Another reason this gets missed is boredom. The trick doesn't stimulate dopamine. There's no immediate feedback loop, no visible validation. In a world optimized for stimulation, boredom feels like failure. People abandon things not because they're ineffective, but because they don't feel productive fast enough. This creates a massive blind spot where boring systems quietly outperform exciting ones. There's also social friction. Talking about small, steady gains feels unimpressive. It doesn't fit dinner conversations or social feeds. People prefer stories that sound dramatic, even if they're unstable. So methods that produce modest, consistent results get dismissed as not worth it, even when they compound into something meaningful over time. This experiment survived skepticism because it didn't try to convert it. It respected it. Instead of promising outcomes, it promised observation. Instead of selling certainty, it offered structure. That subtle shift matters. It positions the audience as capable thinkers, not desperate seekers, and people rise to the expectations placed on them. The truth is, most people aren't missing information. They're missing alignment between their attention and reality. They chase what looks important, not what behaves predictably. This trick exists in that gap, not hidden, just ignored, not complex, just unglamorous. By the time the experiment began, skepticism hadn't vanished, it had evolved. It became disciplined curiosity. And that difference, small as it sounds, is often the only thing separating repeated failure from quiet progress.
The trick explained without killing curiosity. Calling it a trick is already misleading. Tricks imply shortcuts, cleverness, or exploitation. This wasn't any of that. In fact, the core idea was almost disappointingly plain. That's why it needed to be approached carefully. Explain it too fast, and it sounds obvious. Explain it too loosely, and it sounds fake. The balance mattered, because misunderstanding this is exactly why most people dismiss it. At its core, the idea was about isolating one small, controllable action that directly connects effort to outcome within a single day. Not a plan, not a long-term vision, just one repeatable behavior that could realistically be completed daily, measured daily, and adjusted daily. No stacking, no multitasking, no when I have time. The rule was simple. If it couldn't be done consistently in under an hour, it didn't qualify. This immediately separates it from most advice. Common misunderstanding number 1 is scale. People assume money requires magnitude. Big traffic, big audiences, big risk. This flips that assumption. It treats reliability as more valuable than reach. Another misunderstanding is automation. Many think systems only work once everything is optimized. Here, optimization was delayed on purpose. Clarity first, automation later, if ever. Boundaries were critical. The 7 days had rules. No expanding the scope, no adding extra strategies midweek. No chasing improvements until the test ended. That restraint created tension. Every instinct wanted to tweak, add, improve. But discipline here wasn't about working harder. It was about not interfering with the process. Another rule was visibility. The action had to produce some form of external response, even if small, a reply, a click, a completed task, something observable. This wasn't about income yet. It was about feedback. Many people stay stuck because they operate in isolation, mistaking activity for progress. This forced interaction with reality every day. Importantly, the trick didn't promise $100 a day immediately. That number functioned more as a ceiling than a guarantee, a signal of potential, not a claim. The real focus was proving whether cause and effect could be established repeatedly. One action, one outcome, over and over. If that link broke, the experiment failed. What made this uncomfortable was how boring it felt. No dramatic learning curve, no motivational surge, just repetition. The mind kept asking, "Is this it?" That question is dangerous, because it often precedes quitting. Most people interpret boredom as inefficiency. In reality, boredom often means friction has been removed. Another key clarification: this wasn't passive income. It required showing up daily, but it wasn't exhausting either. The energy cost stayed flat, while familiarity increased. That contrast mattered. Many systems burn people out because effort scales with time. Here, effort stayed constant while understanding deepened. The anticipation came from restraint. Knowing results wouldn't be evaluated until day 7 changed behavior. It prevented emotional accounting. Wins weren't celebrated. Losses weren't dramatized. Each day existed only to be completed correctly. That mindset alone separated this from past attempts that collapsed under expectation. By the end of the explanation phase, the trick still didn't feel impressive. And that was the point. Anything that feels impressive early usually hides its cost. This hid its reward instead. It demanded patience, clarity, and obedience to simple rules. Not creativity, not genius. Just execution without interference. The experiment was now clearly defined. No mystery left about what to do, only uncertainty about what would happen. And that uncertainty, controlled and contained, was exactly where meaningful results tend to grow.